Hello, this is David Bernstein. I'm founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and this is the Jewish Contrarians podcast. And I'm with my partner in thought crime, Brandy Shafetinsky. Hello, Brandy.
Hi, David.
All right, so we're here to talk about pushing back against critical Zionist studies. So bear with me because I want to give you some background information about what's going on. Suffice it to say that it is a complete and utter horror show. Um, there's a new institute that recently announced itself called the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. As you can imagine, these are ideologues who believe that Zionism is an illegitimate settler colonialist enterprise, and they are trying to get it declared or treated by the university community as completely beyond the pale and as a kind of a brand of racism, if you will. And obviously, this is not something that we are going to stand for at the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. I don't think any mainstream Jewish organization should be standing for this. They should push back hard. We're pushing back hard, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. And this is really, and I wrote about this in the Jewish Journal, Dan, maybe you could put up a link. Um, this is really right out of the Soviet playbook. Our colleague and friend, Isabella Tabarowski, she's an academic at the Wilson Center, has written extensively about this. Um, she talks about how in the late 1960s, in the wake of the Six-Day War, Soviet Arabists decided that they really were going to go after Zionism as the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, and they created a new field called Zionology, where they opposed Zionism, and they wrote articles, and they wrote a book that was like sort of a bestseller that sold hundreds of thousands of copies and was translated into multiple languages, all to discredit the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. And it seems like that never left us. That remained this sort of blueprint, as Isabel calls it, for anti-Zionism, modern day anti-Zionism today. It was the blueprint for the Zionism is racism resolution in the UN in the I think 1974, and it continues today in modern academia and in the form of this Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. Now, what are these people up to? They're trying to establish centers, critical Zionist studies centers in universities around the country, and this is sort of their opening gambit. And they're having a conference at the UC Santa Cruz and at NYU. Now, NYU says that they have not rented them any space. In fact, our first move was to write NYU Law School, which was listed as the host for this conference, and they wrote us back pretty quickly and said they're not planning on hosting this. That there had been a request, they have no room for them, and when they found out, and you have to really see this to believe it, that this Institute for the Critical Studies of Zionism had imposed a litmus test on participants. That means faculty and students and others who may want to participate, that they have to agree to their points of unity. Okay, their points of unity. Now, what are their points of unity? That Zionism is a settler colonialist movement and a racist movement and so forth. They're very explicit about this. So imagine that for a second, because that is a blatant violation of academic freedom, and it is a blatant violation of almost any university's discrimination policy, which includes very often political discrimination. That is political discrimination. That is arguably discrimination against Jews. We could debate that, but it is certainly discrimination against somebody's political views. So we wrote that the NYU Law School immediately said, yes, this is a violation of our own policy, and we are not going to host it. We also wrote a letter to the NYU Cinema Studies Department, which officially sponsored this. I mean, crazy. They officially sponsored this conference, and they wrote us a terse reply that it violates their discrimination policy, and they were going to withdraw. We also wrote a letter to the chancellor and the provost of UC Santa Cruz, because this, I may have this wrong, but because the Center for Anti-Racism, Brandy, maybe you know the official name. Do you know?
Critical Race and Ethnic Studies Department, or their
Yeah.
Center for their Center for what is it, Race Studies or something?
Yeah, anti-racism and something else. Right. We're sponsoring it. They were official sponsors. In fact, one of the leaders of that, one of the professors and the leaders of that center, is one of the main people pushing for this new Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. These are, by the way, and Brandy might talk more about it, the same folks who are behind liberated critical ethnic studies, same people pushing for BDS. I mean, these are
the Center for Racial Justice.
Center for Racial Justice. Thank you. So, so subsequently, and Dan, if you could put it up, the UC Santa Cruz issued a statement that we were including here, that, and we'll put it in the show notes as well, that basically, they did not endorse, they do not support the conference aims. That was good. They don't support it. Would have been nice if they said that they reject it, but they said they don't support it. B, they pointed out that the organizers of the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism conference had stopped advertising that they were doing a political litmus test. So I think what that did is that let them out of the forcing their own centers to distance themselves from this, because they were no longer using a political litmus test. We're going to get to that in a second. And thirdly, they warned against, thoughtfully, I thought, against their own university community, against doing things that would advance anti-Semitism at a time when anti-Semitism was on the rise. So overall, I was pretty happy with their reply. I thought it could have gone further, but and they did allow their academic centers to continue to sponsor this conference. So, Brandy, you have the sense that maybe they didn't drop the litmus test.
Yeah, well, a couple of things on that. This institute, the conference that they're putting on next month in October, was accepting proposals for speakers and for papers, and that proposal deadline ended before NYU and UC Santa Cruz, we suspect, asked the Institute to drop the litmus test. So all papers and presentations that have been accepted, and as part of the proposal process, those people who's made those submissions had to agree with the points of unity. Yeah. So that's all.
So it's sort of flawed from the outset. Like, in other words, it may be hard for them to go to claim that this is now an open conference. So we've written, I don't know if it's actually been sent yet, but it was as of this morning, we've written a letter to the chancellor of UC Santa Cruz and the provost, telling them that we think that this call for papers is flawed and continues to lock them into this idea, the litmus test. You can't get around that unless they open it up for papers again and give sufficient time for people to submit papers. That now all they're getting are papers that have been subjected to this litmus test. So I think that this is flawed, and I think that they're stuck. And whether they actually force these academic centers to pull out now that we're upping the ante, we'll see. There's another issue here that comes up, of course, and it's going to be interesting to see how various Jewish organizations handle it and how we handle it. We haven't really completely thought through. If a university then tries to establish a Center for Zionist Studies, or is this? Let me take a backpedal here for a second. Is the very idea of this conference discriminatory? In other words, I think it's anti-Semitic, but does the conference, even if they have no litmus test, and have a singular focus on critical Zionism, whatever, should that be considered illegitimate? And should Jewish organizations then come in and sue or threaten to sue the UC Santa Cruz or any other academic sponsors for creating a hostile environment to Jewish students? I think I know where you're at, but go ahead.
So, yes, I do think it's discriminatory on multiple points. I think it violates the UC system, at least their stance on discrimination and protected classes and the rest. The UCs are not supposed to establish or promote anything that's discriminatory against people from multiple groups, including national origin. This institute does exactly that. And it's shocking not only that it took us outsiders to kind of push them to create a little bit of a distance between themselves as an academic institution and this discriminatory institute, if you want to call it that. But the fact that they think that they didn't look into it enough, they led co-sponsorship, their academic weight, the names of these schools, of their academic departments behind this highly discriminatory organization. Maybe it shouldn't be shocking, but it is. And I think that the whole UC system really needs to take a minute and reflect on what they're actually lending their name and credibility to. Because my concern isn't so much that this institute is full of anti-Semites. I'm not surprised. It's, we call it the oldest hatred for a reason. I don't expect all of anti-Semitism to have dissipated and to disappear. But how it's being normalized and legitimized through these institutions of higher education and now K-12 is not just shocking, but it's not something that we should stand for. I can imagine if a group of white supremacists tried to establish an institute on the critical study of eugenics in order to support their anti-Blackness, that would be loudly criticized and pushed back upon. However, this institute, we want to lend, academic freedom and all the rest of it, any other excuse people keep throwing to support something that's highly discriminatory is an anti-Semitism in itself. It shows the hypocrisy and the double standard.
Yeah. So there are organizations that sort of specialize in the legal redress of this. Groups like the Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights, which does file lawsuits or file complaints to the Department of Education when a university discriminates against Jewish students or creates a hostile environment against Jewish students. And it would not surprise me at all if they do that here, or if another organization comes in and does the same. We decided not to do that in our original draft and in our original letters to the universities, because we felt that we had a very high chance of getting them to focus on the discrimination complaint that we filed that would force their hands. And once they did that, and I really believe this to be true, once they did that, this now makes the entire effort look suspect. I mean, are you really going to enfranchise a group of crackpots who were willing to establish a political litmus test? And so I think it makes it much harder now for the university to ever establish a Center for Critical Zionist Studies, because we intervened forcefully in here and showed them to be just absolutely beyond the pale. Now, do I think it would be perfectly legit for another organization to come in with the legal expertise and the like to then say, this whole effort you're sponsoring is still a discriminatory act and creates a hostile environment? I do. And we'll see where they end up. With our specialty is to point out the nexus between these radical ideologies and anti-Semitism. And this is as perfect a case study as you're going to find. This emerges right out of critical social justice ideology, an ideology that first took hold in universities in the form of ethnic studies going back into the late 1960s and became commonplace in many universities around the country. And now they're taking that academic formula and trying to force it down, K through 12 schools, and then, of course, taking it to the next level by singling out Zionism as being an illegitimate national liberation movement. Imagine for a second the critical study of Kurdish nationalism or the critical study of Palestinian nationalism. It would never cut mustard in any of these universities, and I think we should push back very hard. What do you think?
No, I think we should. I also am a little bit more pessimistic, because given the leadership at the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism and their connections, I mean, they hold high-level positions in other academic departments. Yeah. And I would argue those academic departments are already functioning as institutes for the critical study of Zionism. The Critical Race and Ethnic Studies Department at UC Santa Cruz, the head of their department, multiple members of their department are part of this anti-Semitic institute. So what they're pushing out under the guise of critical race and ethnic studies is already going to foment and fuel anti-Semitism. That's the same ideology is already in these departments at UC Santa Cruz, at least. let alone the other academic institutions that the leaders of this anti-Semitic institute are affiliated with. And I mean, my personal call would be for the leadership, the administration of not just UC Santa Cruz, but all the UC systems to really take a look at their academic departments and how many of them are contributing to the increase in anti-Semitism.
Yeah, well, it is. It is very disturbing, and whether they're willing to go back and look at all these ethnic studies departments that were started in the late 1960s that really didn't adhere to the normal academic formula, right? They were activist bodies. They were activist bodies that were set up.
Still are.
And they still are. By the way, if you want to read more about this in depth, our colleague Tammy Rossman Benjamin, who heads of AMCHA, has written a very extensive article, which I cite extensively in my book, Woke Anti-Semitism. And you can look at the chapter on we all are Californians now, which we trace back and use that, explain how this ideology took place in the university settings and how then it left the university and sort of infected our larger society. We have a question from let's see, Cook Brook. Where is this happening in K through 12? I don't know who Cook Brook is, but I have some ideas. Where is this happening in K through 12? Brandy, why don't you answer that?
Sure. So it's happening all over, all in districts all over the state of California. There are many districts, unfortunately, that have gone ahead and contracted with the Liberated Ethnic Studies group and other groups that are affiliated, like GIDO, like the Acosta Education Partners, to provide teacher training and curriculum development. Those same people are associated, affiliated, and work in these academic departments for critical race and ethnic studies in multiple different Cal states and UCs. So Castro Valley is a district, Hayward Unified is a district. It's happening unfortunately, through the mandate now for ethnic studies in California and other states, as we're seeing.
Yep, like Minnesota, Washington, Massachusetts are three states that jump out of it. And the worry about this is it's not just going to be contained in a single course, right, Brandy? It's going to sort of be pieced into various curricula.
So we've seen that and I think an issue that's still kind of sorting itself out in Santa Ana Unified School District in Southern California, where the school board approved 2 new courses that were supposed to start this fall 2023, but have supposedly been postponed. Last I heard from their superintendent. In both of those courses, world geographies, plural, and world histories, plural, were pushing highly anti-Semitic materials and resources and textbooks. So we're seeing the same ideology that's coming from critical ethnic studies that's highly anti-Semitic play itself out in other disciplines that are adopting a critical ethnic studies pedagogy and framework.
By the way, I want to recognize our colleague, Marcy Braverman Goldstein, Dr. Marcy Braverman Goldstein, who was our new director of academic affairs, who took this on with incredible energy and passion, and wrote these letters and is following up with them. So she drafted the letter that we're sending out, telling UC Santa Cruz that they're not done with this yet, that they haven't gone far enough. She also has been sending these letters, sharing these letters with trustees at these various universities. I mean, we are not going to let up on this stuff. Make no mistake. We are not going to. And thank you, Marcy. I think she's going to put up the UC. She's in a car driving. Otherwise, she'd be with us today. But she's going to put up some of the language from that statement. We are not going to let up. And I have to say, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I've come from the mainstream organized Jewish world. I've spent my entire career there. And I have to say, I'm very disappointed with the engagement level of mainstream institutions. They mean well. They understand this threat. One of my colleagues that I was at a conference not too long ago recently called it like a deer in the headlights, that he feels like in the face of this variant of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, that they are caught in deer in headlights, and I think that's really really sad. And I want them to step up to the plate. We don't need JILB, this little group of us, okay, operating still on a shoestring. We're growing, by the way, and we're doing well, and we're going to be a force to reckon with. We already are. We don't need to be heading up all these issues. We don't need to be the first organization sending letters and pushing hard. The other organizations, if we're successful, we won't have to do that work. We'll focus on something else. We have a lot of energy. There's a lot of things that we could do. But unfortunately, too many of the mainstream organizations are not aggressive enough in this work. They're not coming out quickly enough and forcefully enough. And a result, we're not using our entire community firepower to push back. I know they don't like it. I've talked to them. We've seen it. They don't like it. They know it's highly problematic. But for whatever reason, they're just not stepping up to the plate, in my view, in the way they should. Marcy, do you have any? I mean, Marcy was in the background. Brandy, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of brilliant, hardworking, dedicated people working to push back against anti-Semitism and working in these circles. That I think sometimes I say it a lot, and it's, patting my own profession on the back. Sometimes you need a social worker. That I've spent most of my life as an advocate and working in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault victim advocacy. And of course, there are times that it looks like, okay, we're never going to win this battle, but you don't stop. You forge ahead with what's right. There, you can't. I think you can't cower away from a fight against something that's so horrible and evil and negatively impacts our society and our culture. I think that with something like this, there's a right and a wrong. You don't accept crumbs.
Yeah, I agree. And you can always compromise later. Don't compromise up front. Stand for your values up front, and then of course you can compromise and take a half loaf later. I feel like too often we're taking a half loaf up front. We're not utilizing all of our political and social capital to push back against this.
Yeah,
we have much more strength than these organizations are acknowledging.
I think we have an opportunity to also take a lead in educating. To be against the institutionalization of anti-Semitism doesn't mean that we're against diversifying history and expanding the narrative on what's taught in schools.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dan, can you put up Marcy's comment that says both by policy and in practice? This is the statement, part of the statement that came out of UC Santa Cruz. Both by policy and in practice, the university rigorously honors the freedom to present the widest range of viewpoints, irrespective of agreement on those viewpoints. What it's saying here, and by the way, I agree with that in principle, right? But what it's saying here is that we are not going to stop our academic centers from sponsoring this conference because it should fit into the widest range of viewpoints. Now, I think we disagree with that. We think this is beyond the pale, and so, but that said, there is a tough balancing act. We're an organization that, one, believes deeply in liberal values, as our organization suggests. We believe in classical liberal values of open discourse. We want to see the widest range of topics discussed. We are not trying, in a given class, for example, on these topics, if a professor had a reading from an anti-Zionist, I would not raise a finger. I would say that is completely legitimate. But there's a difference here when you take an entire academic department and you dedicate it toward tearing down Zionism and saying that it is illegitimate. That to me is not the same. It is an expenditure of university resources, and we also have to ask what's behind it beyond just ideology. And one of the things that we've looked at, we're looking at more closely now, is that Qatari money from the country of Qatar, or Qatar, as some people say, is funding a lot of these institutes, is funding the intellectual assault against Jewish people and against Zionism, and they're funneling millions of dollars under these foundations, and the universities are profoundly lacking in transparency. They're not sharing where these funding is coming from. But we know now, because there's been some studies, the group ISGAP, which is a Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. I think I got that right. And its CEO, Charles Small, has really done yeoman's work in following the money trail. And they've brought in forensic accountants and others. They've put out some papers on that. This is really important too, because it's not, because what happens is these things start out as inchoate ideas, and they're pushed by crazy ideologues, and then they gain the funding to establish them in the academic discourse. This is what some have called the Red-Green Alliance. It's the alliance between the far left progressives, the kind of people we're talking about, these crackpots, and Muslim Brotherhood activists, Islamist ideologues. And I don't mean Muslims, I mean ideologues, Islamist ideologues that are pushing this agenda with backing from Qatar mostly. It used to be Saudi Arabia, but since 9/11 and all the scrutiny applied to Saudi Arabia, the Saudis have backed away from that. So it doesn't really come from Saudis. It comes from Qatar. So, and by the way, who hosted the World Cup in soccer. So let's not forget that either. Because, God knows how many bribes they paid out, and there's been some reporting on this. So anyway, that's what we're up against, and we've got to fight hard. What do you think, Brandy? How about that?
No, I agree. I agree with you 100%. I think that there's also we're at this decision making on the conversation and debate over free speech and hate speech, and I think that looking at what that means for academic freedom and what happens in spaces of learning, it's an important thing to actually have a discussion on. That to legitimize something as scholarship, everything can't be legitimized as scholarship. What's said on the speaker's corner isn't necessarily scholarship, and that's the concern I have with these types of so-called institutes popping up in our university spaces.
Yep, exactly. But as Marcy just points out, and you can put her last comment up, Dan. The International Center for the Study of Zionism's point of unity are by definition antithetical to university policy and practice. Yep. Absolutely. When you have a points of unity, I mean, how is that academic or scholarly at all? It's not. It's the opposite of scholarship, because it assumes that there's a single point of view. This is the most extreme form of this ideology that we're up against, and it is arrayed against Jewish interests specifically. And so I think we've got to fight back very hard. Dan, put up the we're going to do a little pitch. We don't generally do this. We're not all that great at fundraisers. We like to do the work, but we just want to let you know that we are running this temporary campaign that's a matching campaign. And Dan put up the it's through causematch.com/JILV. It'll be in the show notes as well. You can give us a matching gift toward these efforts. We're gonna fight very, very hard on these issues, and the more money we have to do it, the more we'll be able to hire PR firms to help us, the more op-eds that we can place, the more lobbying that we can do at the state level. We can hire lobbyists. The more people we can hire. We just hired Marcy Goldstein close to half time. The more people like that who can put energy in this, I mean, we've got to continue to scale up, because unfortunately not enough other people are stepping up to the plate. So we're going to punch way above our weight on these issues. All right. Brandy, any final thoughts on what needs to be done here?
No, I think that we said it all.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Dan, for your production behind the scenes. Thank you, Brandy, for being my partner in thought crime. Thank you, Marcy Goldstein, who from the car with her family, chimed in with important comments. And thank you all for being there and supporting our work. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.